Hello there, and welcome to Beyond the Lane. I am your host, Jerry Wynn, and more importantly, I am joined here to talk about his career in League of Legends and the game as a whole, PiraTechnics, Devin Younge. Devin, how's it going today?
Pretty good, Jerry. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you for joining us. How are you feeling these days? Of course, you had some issues with your voice. You fixed it up, or so I've heard.
So as I guess you're hearing now, it's definitely back in action. I put out a couple of posts about it recently, but I was sort of out of the action for a while, had a little bit of surgery, ended up getting that taken care of, and now it's just sort of like, make sure I stay in shape, and this won't happen again.
I am curious about that, because obviously casters talk a lot, tends to happen when you're a caster. Is this a fatigue issue that casters are in general aware of? Is there more awareness now because of you? Is it like something that happened because you're a caster? Like, how did this come about for you?
Well, I think it goes back to when I first initially got this thing. It's called a polyp, and it's sort of a bump on my vocal cords. That the more I did a little research about it, the more I found out that it can happen from a number of sources. The most prevalent of them is vocal abuse. Prior to being a caster, I didn't really have any formal vocal training, and even though we have a lot of help to make sure we have good vocal practices, you can kind of still slip into bad habits, and I definitely had a lot of those. So I think months and months of doing it the wrong way kind of stacked up on each other, and that's really what got me sick. So hopefully, anyone who has also been having bad habits kind of takes a look at that and realizes, oh, okay, well, I got to change things too. So hopefully, no one else suffers because of what I had to go through.
Right. Something good can come from this. Everyone will learn in casting to have better casting habits and better care for their vocal cords, right?
Yeah. So again, it's all about like speaking from the mouth and not from the throat, and it's just something that's been kind of pounded into my head over the last few months. But now that it's better, it's really just making sure to stay vigilant about that kind of thing, and that's the whole thing about preventative care, making sure that you always feel good, and when things feel bad, it's something already going wrong. Like that really rings true, and it's just kind of the thing that hits you by surprise if you're not paying attention.
This is some very specific nuance, but what does that mean? Speaking from the mouth, not the throat.
So a lot of the times when you talk, especially when you're using a stage voice, a louder voice, to enunciate, you need to be really conscious of speaking, having the sound originate here, and you can do a lot of vocal exercises, a lot of warm-ups, a lot of weird mouth movements, if you will, to kind of make sure that is where you're generating the sound from, and not talk in like the back of your throat, because that's what really strains vocal cords. And as somebody that didn't have any formal training prior to doing casting, I never really thought about that until it started becoming a problem.
Well, it sounds like you're in good shape now. I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to kind of feel back in the action. I'm getting ready to go to All Stars. I'm getting ready to start up the new LCS season, and we'll see where that takes me from there. And I'm just really excited to basically be back at the desk.
Now, speaking about you, let's roll it back a bit here. You, of course, had a start. Well, not perhaps your very first start. Actually, tell me, what was your very first casting experience? How did you first get involved in casting? Let's go there.
Okay, we got to go back a few years. It's back in, I think, 2013, really early 2013. I was playing StarCraft 2 a lot, and I started doing YouTube series, just like really tiny things. You can still, I think, find them, but they're awful, so don't. And it was just like I would take somebody's random like gold, silver, plat level StarCraft game and just cast over it and upload it to YouTube using really, really simple programs and inbuilt stuff. So that would be my first introduction to casting, but it definitely was a long way from there.
And your transition to League came about how?
That was about Worlds Season 3. So I in tandem with putting on with doing these little shows for fun and playing a lot of StarCraft, I also would put on like viewing parties for people in my hometown, which was San Diego. And I eventually did one for Worlds, even though it was at the Staples Center, because a lot of people I knew couldn't go. And compared to like the 20, 30 people I would get for StarCraft, we had about 120 people at this bar. It was so many, we actually had completely blocked off our section, and we had to overflow into the restaurant that we had been adjacent to. So the owner was just like completely going nuts, but we had all these people there just watching League on this TV, even if it was a very quick series. It was pretty cool.
That sounds cool. Of course, you eventually got to work with LPLN, EN. How did that come about?
Yeah. So back when I was originally was casting leaks, this was a couple months after I had done that viewing party. I ended up getting in touch with Friskurin for the first time and Kelsey Moser, who were both really interested in producing pretty much an English broadcast for China since one didn't exist at the time. And we just kind of fired it off from there. We eventually got in touch with a couple of people at Twitch TV who really helped us kickstart that, and worked with another org called Games in Asia. And basically, it just sort of took off, even though the stream was, for lack of a better term, ghetto. Oftentimes, it'd be like me or Friskurin running the stream and modding it while casting at like 3 a.m. Pacific time. It was a pretty cool thing, and I think we ended up peaking at like 40,000 for the regionals or something. It was just, at the time, it just blew my mind.
Perhaps the ghetto stream, but with well-spoken casters. You guys did a good job there, and I
Thank you.
definitely appreciated it. Now, I'm not sure if you're aware, Devin, but there was a bit of hubbub around when LPL EN was no longer a thing. Not sure if you're aware of that. There was a bit of commotion around that whole transition over to Riot with the Chinese LPL. How did that come about? How was it like for you?
Yeah, so about that time, about before any of that was made public, me and Friskurin were like a lot of the time talking to Riot, talking to our guys at Twitch, and trying to figure out like how we were going to make this transition, because our original goal was sort of to get picked up by them in the first place. And I guess in sort of a long way that happened for for us. But basically, the first news when it broke out, I wasn't officially announced yet, I don't think. So it was all like in the dark, and Friskurin wasn't going to be working with Riot for another couple of months before she went over to Australia, right? So everyone was like, "Oh no, Riot's taking this away from us." When in reality, it was kind of like what we wanted in the beginning, and the production, it got a lot better. And also, really, the OPL casters that ended up working on it, Pastry Time, Papa Smithy at the time, and of course Spawn, and now Rusty and Atlas and all those guys, they're just fantastic. So I'm really, really happy it ended up happening the way it did, even if it seemed kind of, at the time, a little bit odd, I suppose. Controversial.
Now, of course, you made your way to Europe for the EU LCS. How did that come about, and what was that transition like for you going over to the EU LCS after broadcasting the LPL and, of course, living in America?
Yeah, so about that same time, that's when I got an email from a recruiter at Riot that said, "Hey, were you interested in looking at the European or North American LCS?" And I ended up interviewing for both. They asked me, "Would you be willing to move to Europe?" And well, you know what? I've never really been afraid of packing up and moving, so I figured, why not? I get over there and it's like snowing. It's about, I don't remember. I think it was like early January, so several weeks before we were going to start the LCS. But there's all these things in flux. Everyone's running around. We have this brand new office. It's awesome, but we're like throwing things together. And basically, it was just such a strange experience for me because I hadn't done anything in regards to casting or prepping with a large group of people. So that was so strange and so different from what I'd been doing out of my bedroom for the past year that I almost kind of forgot that I was living in another country until I went to buy groceries, and they would speak to me in German, and I would just be like, "Wait, what?" So it was kind of a lot to take in for a little while.
How has the grocery buying transition been?
Well, my German's better now. I had a little bit from school, but I'm now able to understand about 80-90% of what people tell me, and I can usually respond back with something simple enough. But, it's still a little bit different just not being a native speaker.
I have to ask you, favorite German food you found?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If you've never had schnitzel, it's amazing. It's basically pork or sometimes chicken that's like fried and breaded, and put lemon on it and butter, and that's about it.
Unfortunately, you didn't get to be a big part of Worlds, but you still got to watch it. What do you think about the state of the game today in League? It's a broad question, obviously, but kind of moving over to the game from just talking about Devin, as interesting as you are. What do you think about the state of League today?
Do you mean, could you ask the question again, like as in the professional scene or as in the game itself, like how the metagame is right now?
I would say both, actually, in that order.
All right. Let's start with the pro stuff then. So Worlds was obviously pretty interesting. A lot of unexpected stuff happened, but then of course at the end, SK Telecom took the title, which I think was the most likely scenario out of everybody going into it. In the aftermath of all that, the pro scene, obviously, like we're in an off season, it's always going to be a little bit bumpy, And with people switching around teams and things like that, we'll have to see when the dust settles who's going to be where and what's going to and what region is going to be strong. Still think Korea is going to be big. Still think they're going to be strong for a long time. I expect China to probably pull themselves back up after the world's performance. And I don't think anything huge is going to change, to be honest. From a metagame perspective, I've been playing a little bit in the offseason on the new patches, and I really like a lot of the changes that are going on right now. The one of the biggest ones for me is the home guard changes, where just last patch, they removed home guard boot enchant, but now it's global for everyone at 20 minutes,
Right.
which is awesome because if you're getting wrecked in the base and you don't want to have to buy them, or if you want to get teleport going and then make a massive play there, you don't have to worry about buying the boot enchant. So that's a pretty cool thing. The trinkets as well, because I'm pretty low elo and nobody upgrades trinkets anyways, so now you don't have to.
Right, they don't. I don't. It's hard to remember to do that, It's tough. Trinkets are trinkets. They're not that cool. So how can you remember that?
Yeah, but they're useful.
They are very useful, but they're not that cool. So that's a big trade-off there. Speaking about SKT, one of the many teams in flux, of course. Were you surprised that this team, all their success, then followed the tradition now we're building up of world champions spreading apart a bit?
Well, I would say that the EasyHoon and Tom departures is pretty expected, just considering. I mean, Tom really didn't get a lot of playtime. EasyHoon got some, but considering how high tier he is, it's no surprise that somebody wanted to bid for him, and he's just got to make a smart decision. Marin was definitely one that caught me more off guard, and it'll be curious to see, how that pans out with them picking up a new top laner, and some more subs and stuff too. But it doesn't look quite as hectic as it was last year for them when they had that massive undefeated run and then just kind of couldn't really do anything after the fact.
I feel ashamed now for admitting I never upgraded my trinkets during games.
We've all been there. It's okay.
Yeah,
it's all right,
okay.
Jerry.
Thank you for comforting me through this. Speaking now more on the roster changes we've seen. Fnatic, of course, the best team in the West. That was their MO for a long time, actually, this year. No longer the same Fnatic they once were. Huni and Reignover now moving on to North America. Your thoughts on Fnatic kind of falling apart at the seams? Well, I shouldn't say that much because they should recover still, but the fact that Huni Reignover wanted to get on from the team, was it surprising to you?
When it first came out, yeah, it definitely surprised me a little bit that after they had done so well, Fnatic, they just didn't want to stay on that team. I guess they just found other opportunities. That seemed to be kind of what I was hearing out of all of that. But, these things do happen. It's always a fairly turbulent offseason, and, nobody, even the teams at the top of the table, are really immune to, someone getting an opportunity somewhere else and wanting to go off to it. So we'll have to see really how they fill it out, because a team like Fnatic, especially one that's really that prestigious, and not just in League, across several esports, I have no doubt that they can attract top talent for the next season.
Right, well, Huni Reignover, perhaps a mild surprise, but Yellowstar leaving, a bigger surprise, I think, to many Fnatic fans, kind of the base of the team. Does the team look the same without Yellowstar in it? Can they still maintain the same feel, or do they have to kind of start from scratch now without him?
Yeah, I think that was definitely a much bigger surprise. But Yellowstar, he's been a long time with this organization and a long time in Europe, and I think he just wanted to see something a little bit different. Without that kind of cool head and really experienced game sense and game mind that Yellowstar brought to the table, they're definitely going to have to find somebody or several somebodies that can kind of fill that gap, and that's going to be tough. But again, I have no doubt they'll be able to put together a stellar roster. The question is, who are they going to get?
We've also seen, of course, Gambit Gaming have a much more dramatic upheaval, of course, no longer together. Which of those players from that former team do you think has the biggest chance to impact next year with a new home?
Ooh, that's a good question. If I had to go with people who are on, from this is from the last year's squad, people who are on that squad impacting a big way, I'd probably go first with Cabochard. Just because he was such a high impact player. On the other hand, you could say Forgiven is kind of in the same way, but it just seems like there is a lot of competitive AD carry talent around both the NA and the European LCS, and I think he's going to be valued not quite as high as somebody like Cabochard, who's kind of this top carry that is, I want to say rare, but that's not totally true because you've also got a number of them in Europe, but in NA it's a little bit of a different story. So I guess if I had to rank it, you've got like Cabochard, you've got Forgiven, and then we'll go down to like Diamond Prox and Ghost Pepper.
What is your read on Kissing? He came over to TSM for a trial with them, perhaps going back to Europe now. What do you think about him as a player? How much of an impact can he have for a new team?
Well, he did coin a phrase, the Kissing effect, when he ended up going to H2K in the first place, and that was a very real thing. He just brought so much to the table in terms of his playmaking ability. He turned Yarnin into a very legit carry. Before that, he didn't really have a whole lot of identity as like a standout ADC, but all of a sudden he was getting like 13, 14 kills a game on Sivir, and it just seemed like he was enabled so much by his support player. So I think Kissing is a very valuable player. I don't really know what happened with TSM. Maybe he just didn't really like the environment. Maybe he just decided he'd rather be back in Europe. But, he'll be able to find a spot on probably any team he wants, to be honest.
How about Dignitas with their European imports?
You mean the NA team?
Yes.
Or old Dignitas that became
North American
Polo
team.
Esports and now, okay.
Yeah.
It's a good question because I watched a little bit of Challenger, not as much as I probably should have this last season. It's Smitty J and Kire, yes?
It is.
Yeah, so Smitty J, definitely struck me as like a more or less decent player. Kire I was really not impressed by, and I think this is kind of a big gamble for Dignitas. But we'll have to see if it ends up panning out, and maybe these players maybe there's something that the people that recruited them know that we don't, and maybe they've been practicing hard in the offseason. So, all the best to Dignitas in the upcoming season.
This is somewhat tangential, but you mentioned someone not really impressing you, and I want to speak on this. We saw, of course, one of the Riot analysts be getting some hot water with some pro players for, frankly, offering some analysis on balls when he was playing in Korea. What do you think about this sort of disconnect on, I'm not going to ask you about that in particular, but this disconnect on analysts being able to offer their opinions on players and teams without having this sort of blowback, this negative response from fans and from the players themselves?
Well, I mean, it's really tough for players, for analysts, and for the fans to like interact 100%, kumbaya all the time,
right?
Just because everyone's going to have dissenting opinions. So when somebody is in an analyst position and their job is to basically try and judge a player, or judge like their relative skill level to other players in their same role, to how they fit into their team. You're not always going to have this guy's great at this guy's great at this. If something is troubling or if somebody is not playing up to stuff, that does have to be called out. Now, players sometimes aren't going to like that, and this happens in real sports all the time, but because we have such an instantaneous feedback in esports, everything is on the internet. A lot of people know a lot of other people, so they have these personal connections that you may not see in a much larger sport like, let's say, football or basketball. You're not necessarily going to go up and talk to someone because they talked a little smack about you, or maybe you will, who knows. But at the same time, if you are somebody who's doing an analytical role and trying to find a good way to describe a player that's maybe underperforming, you don't necessarily want to just call them out and just say they're terrible, they're bad. I mean, you have a level of profession where you're able to describe it as, oh, well, this guy, this in his rookie season he did this and this and this, but this season he's not been able to do this at all. He's clearly either underperforming or he just has hit a wall. That was a weird rhyme. There is a lot of room to be able to make comments without being too aggro, if you know what I mean.
Sure. One of the things QuickShot said to me was that he thought it was important to explain why someone did something wrong. Not just to say it was wrong, but to say this is why it was wrong. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. If you don't qualify your statements, you really kind of diminish yourself, and you do a disservice to that analysis in the first place and to the fans listening to it. If you just say, this play was terrible, that's not really analysis at all. You're just stating an opinion.
Getting back on track here with the roster movements, we talked about Korea briefly with SKT. We've seen some more movements beyond that. CJ, Junair, all involved. Mm-hmm. Speaking more to the region as a whole, we saw some chinks in the armor perhaps this year. We saw Junair get swept by CLG, a brand new CLG team. We saw CJ lose pretty cleanly to TSM at IEM. We saw, of course, Fnatic almost beat the best Korean team, SKT, at MSI, and then Ever Gaming did beat them. Do you think the rest of the world is on the precipice of catching up to the Korean teams, the best Korean teams, or is it still going to be a ways to go before that happens?
Well, right now it's a little bit complicated, especially with the offseason and how everyone's changing things around. Because Worlds is, it's one tournament a year, and then we've got MSI as well, it's very hard to kind of see where every region is at exactly, because only the top tier teams really are competing, right? Like, there's no doubt that Korea is the best region because of SK Telecom and maybe a couple other teams and players. But beyond that, we don't really know that much about like how would like the current Samsung or like Incredible Miracle do against like mid tier and lower tier like NA and EU teams. Like that kind of stuff we just don't really know, and we can make assumptions about that, but it doesn't really help anybody. So I would say in terms of catching up, yeah, I think it's happening a little bit more and more every year, just because other teams are playing these Korean teams, these Chinese teams. We're getting a little cross pollination. I think the LMS is a great example of a region that is just massively improved, mostly because they're able to scrim against these other teams on a regular basis as well. And I think the more and more international competition we get, the more we see these games being a lot closer. And that's great for esports. That's great for league as a whole, because it means these teams are going to be able to compete at the highest level consistently.
You mentioned having more international competition. How do you bring about having more instances of these teams playing one another? Do you have more events that invites them all together?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see that, but it's very, very difficult because logistically there's just a lot that goes into these events. I mean, a lot of the things that a lot of fans don't always realize is that planning an event like on the scale of Worlds is just a massive effort. There's so much that goes into it, and there's only so much bandwidth that like I would say like that we have like in an individual office or like even across Riot to do some of that stuff. I would like to see third-party stuff, but on the other hand, it's also very difficult during the season for that to happen, because then teams would have to be flying around to do other stuff all the time, and that wouldn't allow them time to really prepare for the regular league matches. So that's also kind of an issue. But we've also got tournaments like IEM. Those are kind of kicking around these fan voted teams, but also very, very high level teams. And I think that's good as well. So I don't really have a solution right now. It's kind of like an ongoing discussion, I think, throughout the greater esports community. But in the future, I would definitely like to see like more international tournaments. Just not sure exactly how many we would have before it would get to like a perfect point, if there really is one.
Is there some benefit perhaps to potentially blurring the lines in regions and having teams from different regions go to other regions and play there for a while?
Oh, well, it's an interesting idea. It's not like that's never happened. Obviously, everyone remembers CLG going to Korea,
Right.
And that kind of stuff. I'm not 100% sure, actually. I don't think you can do that right now because of the two foreigner rule, if you will, or rather the regional lock. But assuming that could be changed, and then allowing for other teams to go to other regions to compete, it's an idea. I don't think it would probably play out in practice as well as it sounds, though.
One idea I've seen floated a lot, and we've talked about here a lot actually, is transitioning LCS from the best of one format to a best of two or best of three, so that teams can have series play every week, get used to that, get used to breaking down teams in a more detailed way for that purpose, and then they'll be more accustomed to that when it comes to playing the big Korean team, big Chinese teams on the big stages. Do you think that's reasonable?
Well, it's certainly an interesting proposal. I think that if you have like a best of two or a best of three instead of best of ones, obviously you get more game of that. But you have to figure out logistically, is that going to be something that can be done within a regular broadcast schedule? Is that something that actually will benefit the teams? Obviously, adapting, I would argue, yeah, that's great. You can adapt to a different strategy. You're not just going to get cheesed in one game and then, oh, well, you're never going to play them until halfway through the split. So on the whole, I would say it sounds like a good idea. It just has to be very carefully planned out to be able to execute that kind of change, right?
Well, for you, what is the best next thing to happen in the West to help them catch up to the best Eastern teams, like SKT, for example?
Just play them more if they can. I mean, that's the thing. Like, the reason teams like Fnatic and Origin are always at the top of their game is because they're the ones that get to play internationally against these big guys, and test out what they've got. I would like to see more cross-regional scrimming, but that's something that's almost a technological limitation, right? Like, people don't want to play across like crazy ping, and it's not going to help unless you go and everyone goes to the boot camp in Korea during World season. But long-term solution, I don't really know yet. That's something that's definitely got to be thought about more.
You mentioned Fnatic and Origin, how well they played in the EU LCS and kind of separating themselves, in part because of international experience, perhaps. Does that kind of create a divide in the LCS when you have teams like Fnatic, Origin, TSM, Cloud9 consistently going to the big tournaments and getting that experience, whereas other teams don't get that same experience?
I think yes and no. On one hand, yes, you've got a little bit of. Excuse me, one second. I gotta close something. You've got a little bit of an issue with the fact that these other teams are playing less than other teams, so they're not able to get quite the same amount of experience. They're not necessarily playing against those big opponents. But on the other hand, when teams like Origin, Fnatic do go to these big leagues and come back, then they are playing against all these other teams who are kind of learning and picking up tips and tricks from them. And also, they're able to watch, too. It's not like just because you're playing, you're instantly getting a much better advantage over people if you can actually watch those same games and see everything. So, it's a little bit of both.
Looking forward now to the All-Star event, perhaps less so forward than changing entire LCS formats, but more immediate. I believe we've lost Dylan, albeit temporarily, I'm sure. We're going to work right now on getting him back with you, because I know you want more PiraTechnics. We all do. I certainly do. I could not stand one more moment away from him, but I might go one more moment. I'm going to ask Dylan when he gets back. I'm going to ask Devin when he gets back about the All-Star event coming up, where he's going to be casting, as a matter of fact. If you have missed some of that, we have for the LCK All-Star team, Marin, Score, Faker, Prey, and Madlife. NALCS bring Dyrus, Meteos, Bjergsen, Double F, Aftermoo. That Rush Hour combo, or I suppose X Rush Hour, ERS. I'm not sure what the new name is for Rush Hour, if they're just dead. We're actually going to go to a quick countdown here to get him back online with us. Give us 5 minutes. We'll be back. Don't go anywhere. Please, I implore you to stay here with us. For Pyro. He's back. Devin's back. I called him Dylan in my confusion of what was going on, actually. But no, Devin, PiraTechnics, is back with us. How are you? Are you still good?
Still good. Just had a momentary issue with my Skype, but everything is pretty good again.
That's okay. I managed to cover 2 entire All-Star teams and their rosters while you were gone. So we got some context out there. Yeah. A good transition then for us to talk about the All-Star event where you're going to be casting. I want to ask you about the teams here. And first, I have to say, the NALCS team. We have Rush Hour returning. How is this team going to play out, do you think? Bjergsen, Dyrus, Meteos, and, of course, former Rush Hour.
I mean, when you think of NA All-Stars, like of the past 2-3 years, this is pretty much it. There's a lot to be excited for on this team, like a lot of kind of retro vibe, right? You've got Rush Hour returning together. Not really sure how they're going to play out together. I've seen them in several years, so it should be good. It should be exciting. You've got Meteos in the jungle again, and everyone's going to fondly remember a lot of the things he was able to pull off. And then, of course, Dyrus' last hurrah. That's kind of my personal favorite, getting to see Dyrus again before he goes back to retirement, and see how he pulls it off against the ice teams.
The real questions here: how does Rush Hour work, and will they leave Dyrus by himself in his last hurrah?
Well, CLG oftentimes focused on the bot lane, so I'm going to go out on a limb and say probably.
We have the Rift Herald now, though, right? New objective.
It's true. There's a reason to be up there.
Yeah. So I'm sure, another reason to be up there. The EU team. You, of course, are especially familiar with them. Huni, Amazing, Frog, and Reckless Kasing. What do you think about them?
Well, I think it's going to be in the top lane. Probably Huni just running train on Dyrus, but we'll see. And that's just for the EU versus NA team, game, but I don't want to give too much away. For the rest of the guys, I think that it should be fairly well balanced. I mean, I thought at first we were going to have Expeke, right, and then he wasn't going to be going. And now we have Froggen. Froggen is, make no mistake, like regardless of how Elements ended up performing this year, he's still a fantastic mid laner. He's still one of those guys that you just, no matter what you do to him, he'll still stay relevant throughout the entire game. So I think this is going to be like a very stable roster, and I expect them to do great things and rep Europe well.
Huni could run train on Dyrus, perhaps, but will he run train on Marin?
That is another story entirely. We didn't get to find that out at Worlds. I'm gonna guess no, but we'll see. Maybe he'll pull something even yet unseen out.
The Korean team, Faker, Mad Life Mar, and of course Score and Prey as well. Pretty strong on paper. The favorites here, you think?
Oh well, since it's not necessarily a one region kind of effort, since everyone's grouped together, I don't want to call them the favorites because they've got a whole bunch of other people at the back of them. But individually, pound for pound, I'd say they're one of the strongest regional teams. If you want to go with like who I think is maybe like the competitors for them, I go with maybe the LP. This is a group that's just like completely stacked with talent. They actually have a Korean in there as well. It's rookie. But what I'm really excited about with that team is we get to see Uzi and POIL play together, which is kind of like the dream.
The LPL team perhaps looking to regain some prestige at the All-Star event. Whatever can be gotten from an All-Star event. I don't know how much that really is, but
a lot of fun at the very least.
Yeah, so have some fun together, which is more than I think LGD has had in recent weeks and months, it would seem.
Yeah, they've definitely not had the best time, but it's all about picking yourself up off the floor and kind of going back from square one. But really, this All-Star event, like, it's definitely kind of a chance for a lot of the players to let loose, and there's just going to be so many crazy things, so many different style events, not just the 5v5 stuff, that I think we're going to get to see some like really, really nutty plays, and that's what I'm looking forward to the most.
You mentioned the new format. Give us some insight into that, because it is very different. I think a lot of people still don't understand exactly what all is going to go on at the event.
All right, well, I'll only give you a taste, because if I wanted to go into like full detail, we'd probably be here all night. But
please,
basically, you've got the basic 5v5 action, and that's pretty easy to understand. Each regional team is going to face each other regional team once, and since they're pooled together in Fire and Ice, they gain points for winning for that team, and Fire or Ice will basically win at the end of it, with the finals being like the best performing team from one and the best performing team from the other. So we could see Korea versus LPL, we could see EU versus NA, just if they actually perform that level. We've also got a 1v1 bracket, which everyone is super stoked on because we see Froggen versus Faker. But there's lots and lots of other potential like awesome 1v1 matches to choose from. And then there's all these crazy game modes, right? There's a mode where you're playing pretty much mostly assassins. There's one where you're playing all 80 carries. There's one where you have, this is my favorite one, it's called Tandem, where there's going to be 10 players on each team controlling controlling 5 champions. So one person has the mouse and the other has the keyboard, and they have to play each other.
A lot of fun stuff coming in there. Of course, we don't want to go too far into it. We're going to wait for yours to play out with you at the helm, with you driving that train, right?
Oh yeah, I'll be conducting the hype train. I don't have a little wood whistle like Monte Cristo, but I'll try to find one before the event.
You should buy one, I think. A good investment for you. Last question for you. Give me the team to look out for on the rise going to 2016.
Ooh, that is definitely going to be a tough question. Just out of the blue, just what I've been thinking about in my own mind, I'm going to go ahead and say Origin, because at this point, they're probably the only team in both of the LCS regions, as well as across a lot of the other regions, that are staying the most stable. And they've made a definite upgrade. Like, Power of Evil, I think, on a good day, can definitely outplay Xpeke, and he's got a little bit more kind of razzle-dazzle to his playstyle. Plus, they can always fall back on Peke if they need him. So I really, really like the direction that they're heading, and I can't wait to see what they end up bringing out to the European LCS at the start of the 2016 season.
Origin with PoE, definitely a team to watch out for. This has been PiraTechnics joining us for a wonderful conversation. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
And look forward to seeing him at the All-Star event this month. I look forward to seeing it. And he'll, of course, be driving that train with his new whistle. Right? Excellent. Excellent. Great whistle there. Great train whistle. Thanks again to PiraTechnics. And thank you all for watching. Follow the channel down there, twitch.tv/daily.dot. If you missed part of the interview, the VOD is at daily.esports on YouTube. Subscribe there as well. Like us on Facebook and Twitter, .esports. And for the best in esports news and reporting, daily.com. Thanks for watching.